Chapter 20 of A Negro Explorer at the North Pole by Matthew A. Henson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20. From Karna, the Roosevelt sailed to Itiblu, where hunting parties secured 31 walrus and 1 seal. By the 11th of August we had reached the northern shore of Northumberland Island, where we were delayed by storm. It was shortly before noon of this day that we barely escaped another fatal calamity. Chief Wardwell, while cleaning the rifle of Commander Peary, had the misfortune to have the piece explode while in his hands. From some unknown cause a cartridge was discharged, the projectile pierced 2 thick partitions of 1.5 inch pine, and penetrated the cabin occupied by Professor Macmillan and Mr. Borup. The billet of that bullet was the shoulder and forearm of Professor Macmillan, who at the time was sound asleep in his berth. He had been lying with his arm doubled and his head resting on his hand. A half-inch nearer and the bullet would have entered his brain. As is always the case with narrow escapes, I too had a narrow escape, for that same bullet entered the partition on its death-dealing mission at identically the same spot where a few minutes previously my head had rested. Dr. Goodsell was quickly aroused. He attended Professor Macmillan, and in a short time he diagnosed the case as a gunshot wound. Finding no bones broken, or veins or arteries open, he soon had the professor bandaged and comfortable. At the time of the accident to Professor Macmillan, the ship was riding at anchor, but with insufficient slackway, so in the afternoon, when the excitement had somewhat abated, Captain Bob decided to give the ship more chain, for a storm was imminent, and he gave the order accordingly. The boatswain, in his haste to execute the order, and overestimating the amount of chain in the locker, permitted all of it to run overboard. We were in a predicament, with the storm upon us, no anchor to hold the boat, and a savage, rocky shore on which we were in danger of being wrecked. There was a small 500-pound anchor with a 9-inch cable of about 150 fathoms remaining, which was repeatedly tried, but the ship was too much for this featherweight anchor, and dragged it at will. Commander Peary, with his usual foresight, had ordered steam as soon as the approach of the storm was noticed, and now that the steam was up, he ordered that the ship be kept head on, and steam up and down the coast until the storm abated. The storm lasted until the night of August 13, and the best part of the following day was spent by 2 boat crews of 12 men, in grappling for the lost anchor and chain, and not until they had secured it and restored it once more to its locker were they permitted to rest. With the anchor secure, walrus hunting commenced afresh, and on the ice floes between Hakluyt and Northumberland Islands 30 more walrus were secured. On August 16, the Roosevelt steamed back to Karna, and the Esquimo people who intended living there for the following winter were landed. A very large supply of meat was landed also. In addition to the meat, quite a number of useful presents, hatchets, knives, needles, some boards for the making and repairing of sledges, and some wood for lance and harpoon staves, and a box full of soap were landed. This inventory of presents may seem cheap and paltry to you, but to these natives such presents as we made were more appreciated than the gift of many dollars would be by a poverty-stricken family in this country. With the materials that Commander Peary furnished would be made the weapons of the chase, the tools of the seamstress, and the implements of the homemaker. The Esquimos have always known how to utilize every factor furnished by nature, and what has been given to them by the Commander has been given with the simple idea of helping them to make their life easier, and proves again the axiom, "The Lord helps those who help themselves." After disembarking the Karna contingent, the ship steamed to Etah, arriving there on the afternoon of August 17. As the Roosevelt was entering the harbor of Etah, all hands were on deck and on the lookout, for it was here that we were again to come in touch with the world we had left behind a year before. A large number of Esquimos were running up and down the shore, but there was no sign of the expected ship. Quickly a boat was lowered, and I saw to it that I was a member of the crew of that boat, and when we reached the beach the first person to greet me was old Panikpah, greasy, smiling, and happy as if I were his own son. I quickly recognized my old friend Huadluna, who greeted me with a merry laugh, and my misgivings as to the fate of this precious pair were dispelled. If you will remember, Panikpa and Puadluna were the two Eskimos who found, when on our poleward journey, just about the time we had struck the big lead, that there were a couple of fox traps, or something like that, that they had forgotten to attend to, and that it was extremely necessary for them to go back and square up their accounts. Here they were fat, smiling, and healthy, and I apprehend somewhat surprised to see us, but they bluffed it out well. Murphy and the young man Pritchard were also here. Murphy and Pritchard were the members of the crew who had been left here to guard the provisions of the expedition, and to trade with the Eskimos. Another person also was there to greet us, but who had kept himself alive and well by his own pluck and clear grit, and who reported on meeting the commander of having had a most satisfactory and enjoyable experience. I refer to Mr. Harry Whitney, the young man from New Haven, Connecticut, who had elected at the last hour the previous autumn to remain at Etah to hunt the big game of the region. When the Roosevelt had sailed north from Etah the previous August, he had been left absolutely alone. The Erik had sailed for home, and there was no way out of this desolate land for him until the relief ship came north the following year, or the Roosevelt came south to take him aboard. His outfit and equipment were sufficient for him and complete, but he had shared it with the natives until it was exhausted, and after that he had reverted to the life of the aborigines. When the Roosevelt reached Etah, Mr. Whitney was an Eskimo, but within 1 hour he had a bath, a shave, and a haircut, and was the same mild-mannered gentleman that we had left there in the fall. He had gratified his ambitions in shooting musk oxen, but he had not killed a single polar bear. At Etah there were 2 boys, Etukashu and Apela, boys about 16 or 17 years old, who had been with Dr. Cook for a year, or ever since he had crossed the channel to Ellesmere Land and returned again. These boys are the 2 he claims accompanied him to the North Pole. To us, up there at Etah, such a story was so ridiculous and absurd that we simply laughed at it. We knew Dr. Cook and his abilities. He had been the surgeon on 2 of Peary's expeditions, and, aside from his medical ability, we had no faith in him whatever. He was not even good for a day's work, and the idea of his making such an astounding claim as having reached the Pole was so ludicrous that, after our laugh, we dropped the matter altogether. On account of the worldwide controversy his story has caused, I will quote from my diary the impressions noted in regard to him. August 17, 1909, Etah, North Greenland. Mr. Harry Whitney came aboard with the boatswain and the captain boy, who had been left here last fall on our way to Cape Sheridan. Murphy is the boatswain and Pritchard the boy, both from Newfoundland, and they look none the worse for wear, in spite of the long time they have spent here. Mr. Whitney is the gentleman who came up on the Erik last year, and at the last moment decided to spend the winter with the natives. He had a long talk with the commander before we left for the north, and has had quite a lengthy session with him since. I learn that Dr. Cook came over from Ellesmere Land with his 2 boys, Etukashu and Apela, and in a confidential conversation with Mr. Whitney made the statement that he had reached the North Pole. Professor Macmillan and I have talked to his 2 boys and have learned that there is no foundation in fact for such a statement, and the captain and others of the expedition have questioned them, and if they were out on the ice of the Arctic Ocean, it was only for a very short distance, not more than 20 or 25 miles. The boys are positive in this statement, and my own boys, Utah and Uquia, have talked to them also, and get the same replies. It is a fact that they had a very hard time and were reduced to low limits, but they have not been any distance north, and the commander and the rest of us are in the humor to regard Mr. Whitney as a person who has been hoodwinked. We know Dr. Cook very well, and also his reputation, and we know that he was never good for a hard day's work. In fact, he was not up to the average, and he is no hand at all in making the most of his resources. He probably has spun this yarn to Mr. Whitney and the boatswain to make himself look big to them. The commander will not permit Mr. Whitney to bring any of the Dr. Cook effects aboard the Roosevelt, and they have been left in a cache on shore. Kulatingwa is here again, after his trip to North Star Bay with Dr. Cook, and tells an amusing story of his experience. It is only from a sense of justice to Commander Peary and those who were with him that I have mentioned Dr. Cook. The outfitting of the hunting expedition of Mr. Bradley was well known to us. Captain Bartlett had directed it and had advised and arranged for the purchase of the schooner John R. Bradley to carry the hunting party to the region where big game of the character Mr. Bradley wished to hunt could be found. We knew that Dr. Cook was accompanying Mr. Bradley, but we had no idea that the question of the discovery of the North Pole was to be involved. I have reason to be grateful to Dr. Cook for favors received. I lived with his folks while I was suffering with my eyes, due to snow blindness, but I feel that all of the debts of gratitude have been liquidated by my silence in this controversy, and I will have nothing more to say in regard to him or to his claims. End of chapter 20.